I'm honored to invite John Schwartz, the head of Global Business Development of edX, one of the world's biggest online education providers, although he's actually spent many years living here in Dubai, but he's come over to the US to share with us a provocation about their learning and share 3 approaches that any institution can introduce and emulate to help you, your colleagues, and students thrive in this digital age. So after John's shared his ideas, I know that I've already got two people who have told us that they'd also like to come and speak. But I do invite you to offer your own experiences, what you've done at your own institutions that have improved your understanding of student success. So please join us now for welcoming for the next sort of 35 minutes, Mr. John Schwartz. Thank you, John.
Good morning. I have to say before I start that this is my first trip in 2 years. And prior to the pandemic, I was coming to the region, almost every 4 to 6 weeks. And I personally have a long history here. My first trip was in 1998. And I've been living and working here kind of the last 23 years. So everything that I'm going to be saying today comes from a pretty biased, special place in terms of how I feel about academia here in the region, learning, and how we can help you, build a better system. So with that, it's, and I've heard this a lot in the last couple days, the pandemic was the biggest inflection point and has made our job and my colleague from Coursera, much easier, right? We were evangelizing online digital learning and its efficacy, and honestly, a lot of universities and institutions, they were interested, but I wouldn't say they were aggressively pursuing it. And there's no surprise there. Even Harvard and MIT, our founders, everybody was a little bit slow to pull the trigger, but then, as I just heard my colleague say, in less than 3 weeks, the entire world flipped a switch and went online. And so now we see this kind of scream, how do we beef up our online programs? What are the resources we have to allocate? What kind of professors' time do we have to allocate? What kind of money are we going to need to throw at this? And today is meant to be kind of a constructive way to really simplify what's becoming, a growing problem. But I will say this, and I'm starting to hear this more now, if we don't collectively switch the way we think and be open to the changes that are happening in the world and, what's going on in technology, it doesn't matter how well endowed your university is, who's backing it. This is a conversation that is no longer an option. This is a conversation that you need to be actively part of, and many of the people that I've spoken to in the last 2 days are obviously doing it, but there needs to be a greater push. And what's so nice about being back in person is that for the first time in 2 years, not being on a Zoom, sitting with people and talking as groups, we are all in this together. It's not a competitive environment, and I think these kinds of exchanges of information are really important. Look, I'm just going to reiterate what you all know. The learner ecosystem has changed. Everybody agrees, blended, it's here to stay. We're not going back to the old traditional model. Prior to the pandemic, it was fully brick and mortar. During the pandemic, it was online. Now there's a kind of a healthy mix of blended and in person. But the learner, and this is so important, and this is where I've seen a lot of challenges, we're dealing with much different learners 5 years ago than even 2 years ago. These are people, I heard the gentleman who's getting his MBA was saying, there is tons of accessibility, tremendous amounts of platforms, full access. Learners are going to take advantage of that, and they're going to take advantage of that not because it's accessible, they're going to take advantage of it because they need to ensure that they're going to be employable. And I can tell you, I sit and my team sits on the front line with corporations and governments globally, and everybody is challenged to find graduates that have skills to get a job. And that's really what lies at the heart of this. If students coming into your university know that after their 4 years, they are bankable and they're employable, you're going to be in a good place. And again, this is just a reiteration of what you're experiencing. Technology, and I see this with very few universities, even our own founders, I mean, technology is changing the behind-the-scenes infrastructure much quicker than anybody's prepared for. 5 years ago, when I would give this kind of talk, the first thing I would say to the audience is, hey, what percentage of jobs do you think will be obsolete by 2030? People would say like 10%, 15%, which is a lot. But we all know in this room now, it could be 50, 60, 70%. In the next 2 years, 52% of the workforce is going to at least need some modicum of upskilling. I mean, and the challenge that I personally have is that we hear these statistics so much, you know, we become a little numb to them and figure, oh, we'll just deal with it. But it really is time, you know, this really is meant to be a call to action and supporting each other, because the train is moving and it's moving really quickly. As we've heard in other sessions, you know, technology is changing skills, and we don't know what those skills are going to be in 5 years, right? My kids are 14, 12, and 9. I have no idea what their career is going to look like. And nobody else, even the smartest people in this room, have no idea either in 10 years what skills they're going to need. But there are many ways to prepare and buttress whatever curriculum, whatever system you're currently using. For those that don't know edX, and trust me, this is not a plug, this is so you can understand the tools that are available, Coursera being another great tool. You know, edX is the world's only nonprofit founded and funded by Harvard and MIT. We're a consortium of about 160 schools, and as well as enterprises, the Amazons, the Googles, the Microsoft, the IBMs. And the reason those people are on the platform is for the exact reason I said before, which is, hey, if I don't get a 4-year degree at a good school, what are my options? Well, Google came out with a certificate, a degree, a 6-month degree, under $1,000. And you know what? If you successfully complete Google's degree in 6 months, more than likely, you're going to get a job at Google. And if you don't get a job at Google, you're going to be able to get a job at one of their competitors. Everybody's seeing the need. So if universities globally were turning out perfectly qualified job candidates, these other enterprises would not be getting in the mix. So we, in academia, we need to be on parity. And we need to do everything that we can do collectively to make sure our learners are going to go off into the world with a minimal skill set that gets them hired. So I'm going to kind of go through these pretty quickly because I know Tim wants to start the questions, but I try to break this down as simply as I could, right? We've got to work on the students, and we have to meet them where they live. These are digital savvy, evolving learners that really understand the digital world. So you've got a great advantage there. There's nobody in any of your institutions that don't have a pretty good handle on the landscape and are more than comfortable adjusting to it. So in a hybrid world, you've got the perfect learner if you position what you are teaching them to give them, again, tools they need to get hired. The other thing, big tool, is you got to leverage what's out there, right? You don't need to create all of your content that's in person online. Pandemic was a perfect example. I think Zahir from Coursera talked about it. I'll talk about it. When the world flipped a switch, every university on the planet that had basically, was trying to figure out their online future plans, they were scrambling, right? Nobody had time to take their in-class curriculum and put it into a MOOC. But with platforms like edX and Coursera and other ones, if you needed a macroeconomics class, you could get one from Harvard. And in fact, Coursera and edX, we gave away to any university upwards of 5,000 courses for free, meaning your learners could instantly plug into those courses online in addition to your curriculum and receive their certificate that you could then give credit for. And those programs are still going on. So again, nobody expected a pandemic and nobody expected the world to flip that switch, yet there were tools, and I want to emphasize free tools, that any university could utilize, and over 3,000 globally did, so their learning wasn't interrupted. But these are all things you can access now in terms of micro degrees or layering on things to ensure employability and boost the school's brand in terms of the feedback it gets from those graduating students, right? Because we're all in this competition for learners and students at the end of the day. I think it's no surprise to anybody, and I'll go through this quickly. Again, I've been doing this a while. Learner profile has so radically changed. And I would say a lot of administration's profile hasn't radically changed, right? So I'm always trying to push, we have to meet the student where they live, what their interests are, what their skill sets are, what we know they will adapt and respond to. And in this new world of non-traditional education, stackable, modular, flexible, accessible, having content available on a 24/7 basis when you can talk to other people around the world at any time of day, that's a powerful tool that you can incorporate. As I said, I don't expect, and I think the expectation is, nobody's going to go out and hire a brand new digital staff, although some universities, like my friend here in the front, who's the dean of e-learning, they have a pretty robust staff, but there is a lot that currently exists that is easy to implement, easy to expand as you become more comfortable, and can be put immediately into play. And to the extent that we collectively can help you do that and be a sounding board, that's what we do, and that's how we hopefully can continue to meet these growing demands. I talked about the online campus solution, and the reason I'll bring this up again, and Coursera talked about it as well, is that now that we're in this hybrid model, and you don't want to spend lots of time and resources and divert your professor's attention from what they're currently doing, and we know there's lots of resistance, you can layer in certain things. Just as one example, tangible example. We have a program, Coursera has a program, ours is called a MicroMasters. Let's say it's supply chain from MIT. This is about a 10-month program, 5 courses, about $1,000 US, okay? 24/7 accessibility. If you were to add this into your senior class curriculum for those learners that were interested in supply chain, it could be data science, it could be data analytics, the day that person gets their certificate is the day they are employable. And just to show you the power, in addition to your own universities, if that learner says, you know what, this was a very valuable 10 months of my time, and it was $1,000 US, if they want to go to MIT to complete their master's degree in supply chain, MIT views that as 50% of a full master's degree. Now, I know you're aware of that. Even though I see it every day, I'm still astounded by that. But the point I want to make is there are all these simple tools that Coursera, that edX, that other platforms can offer that you can work into your curriculum that is not expensive, that is not obtrusive, but the tangible results and the return on that investment will carry your institution. And with that, we'll go to Q&A.
Thank you. Thank you very much, John. So, as I said at the beginning, I believe we've got a few people who already want to respond and share their experience. And so can we please have a microphone brought to the middle where Professor Angela Owusu-Ansah from Ashesi University in Ghana, I believe, would like to offer some thoughts of their experience. Sorry, just behind you.
Good morning, good evening, good afternoon. My name is Angela Owusu-Ansah. I serve as provost. And very briefly, we stumbled across a discovery through the online experience. And I'll just share 3 words: purpose, transdisciplinary, and I'll think of the third one soon. It's purpose, digital native. And what happened was, at the end of the first semester of online instruction that was disruptive as well as we carried out a very short study to determine from the students how they felt that their learning gains had occurred, if it had, in comparison to if they had been on a campus. We discovered that there was no difference with gender, with socioeconomic status, whether they were first generation or not. But one big difference we did find was between the final year students and the first year students. And the major difference there was that the final year students had purpose. And so we decided that in the subsequent year, and again this year, because we found out that it worked so well, was we gave the first year students purpose. And that purpose trumped all the online angst. And what we did was, it was a collective purpose. We asked them to work in groups, and they were to identify an African challenge that was dear and near to their hearts. And we provided them with a few months of transdisciplinary skills: design thinking, systems thinking, data visualization, creativity, innovation, etc. So at the end of it all, tapping into the digital native strengths, they were not graded for the period that they worked on this. Instead, they were asked to create a web page where it would be public. Their solution would be public, and they peer evaluated each other. Now, I share this to say that in the kinds of students that have emerged from that experience, to quote one student, I used to think these problems were a government problem, but now I realize that I can be a catalyst in solving this. To quote one professor, he says, the students went from 0 to 60 within weeks of what would typically have been months. These transdisciplinary skills are the underbelly of the fourth industrial revolution. As you know, the fear of jobs being taken over still has the top skills still being soft. And by passing our students through this process, we believe that we prepared them for the future, and they've got this purpose mindset that is aligned with our mission. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed. John, I wondered, in respect of purpose, I mean, did you notice any change in participation rates in your courses over the last sort of 18 months? Has there been more dropouts, or everyone now really getting stuck in?
Yeah, I think just the opposite. I mean, obviously in the first 6 months of the pandemic, our enrollment went up 18-fold, so almost 11 million learners. And it just continues to grow. Because again, I mean, as you said it better than I could ever even say it. But we didn't need the proof point. You know, the pandemic was an unfortunate catalyst and a tipping point. But the things that you just very, nicely articulated, there's so much benefit, right? And again, we're not going to tell you that you don't need administrations and faculty and mentorship and cohorts to be part of that process. We're saying we're going to give you the highest quality content that exists in the world in a format that's designed for the learner to be able to use that content in a meaningful, workable way, but how you support that learning and the tools you gave your students, it's the perfect package. So I want to make sure, and Zahir from Coursera, we're not saying that we're providing the panacea. We're saying that we're providing a tool that every government, every enterprise, every university, no matter where they are in the world, are going to have to utilize due to time efficiency, cost efficiency, and the scale at which technology is changing the entire global landscape.
Thank you. I also know that Professor Erasmus, also from Africa, but Southern African, in the University of Pretoria, had some remarks to share about how they've responded over the last 18 months.
Thank you very much, Tim. I'm Barend Erasmus, Dean of Faculty of Natural and Agricultural Sciences at the University of Pretoria. My comments actually, and we didn't prepare this beforehand, but it ties in really nicely with Angela's comments and also John's comments around student-centeredness. Pre-pandemic, we focused on good teaching practice in class. We had different ways of interacting, small groups, large groups, discussions, tutorials, wide diversity. But at that point, we did not have a good sense of which graduate attributes and outcomes and skills are linked to face-to-face activities versus mostly content activities. Into the pandemic. Now we focus on the initially emergency online transition, and now hopefully to a more, shall we say, a measured approach to blended learning to achieve the appropriate pedagogic outcomes. But the one thing that we don't yet know is how do the soft skills that we need face-to-face activities for, how do they translate into the digital domain? And this is not just a theoretical question. The existential challenges facing our planet, poverty, inequality, sustainability transitions, climate change, drought, disaster, you name them, these require skill sets that rely on people's ability or students' ability to act for change, to navigate diversity, to think in systems approaches, to have a holistic approach to these challenges. And those are the skills that, so far as we know, do need face-to-face interactions to develop, right? Or, in most cases, we might not know to what extent face-to-face activities are needed to develop those skills. So now we sit in the situation where you've got a youth voice, our students saying, we want to change the world, we want to make an impact, and we're presenting a training solution, which is at this point strongly focused on digital content, because that's where our focus lies. But I'd like us to put our gaze a little bit further down the line. How do we get these skills that rely on human interaction to develop so that we have the appropriate graduate skills to address the future challenges facing humanity? Thank you.
So I'll answer that in a somewhat ambiguous way, but look, not everything could be taught online, but I'm going to use your diversity and inclusivity example. One of our partners on the platform is a nonprofit called Catalyst, which really globally is recognized as one of the leaders in diversity, equity, and inclusion, and inclusivity. And for our own training at edX, this is what we go through on a mandatory basis every year. There are simulations in the training. There are things that you get to experience, obviously visually, but there have been workshops within edX to watch content together in cohorts, and to your point, have that interaction. But I'm sure you know, many of these skills can actually be taught online if the tools that the content provider is using, strikes the right balance. And of course, no surprise because of who we're founded by, every MOOC on our platform goes through a MOOC development checklist. So it has to go through 150 points in order to make it onto the edX platform. And that's because we take a tremendous amount of information from MIT's neuroscience lab in terms of making sure that that learner can use those skills in a real world setting. So I know if I talk for more than another 4 minutes, I got a quarter of the audience already looking at their phones thinking about lunch. I get that. So I may throw in a picture, and it may be just a random picture, but it gets your mind back. And then I know once I have your mind back, hey, this is an optimal time to throw in a quiz, just a 4-question. I mean, there is a lot of thought, as you would imagine being in academia and a dean, into how these are put together. But again, my standard answer is, however your university institution sees fit in terms of building an external set of tools around that content. I can assure you it's going to be great content and be taught as effectively as it can be from an online perspective. Your job is to figure out, do we have work groups, breakout sessions? Do we form a big cohort and have our own Slack channels? Or, I mean, there's all kinds of things that universities and governments and enterprises are doing. When somebody's taking an Excel class, maybe it's a refresher from Accenture, they've got 1,000 people from around the world all taking it together in their own private cohort. And customizing it in terms of data, case studies that would be relevant to those sets of workers in the workplace. So again, we're giving you the foundation and we'll give you the skills and tools. How you build that out, there's a wealth of options.
Thank you. We actually have a gentleman also on the same table who was very patiently waited to contribute. So can we get the microphone to the chap in the smart checked tie from...
Oh, he's a plant. I know him.
Okay.
Well, Hassan Salim from the UAE University, and let me welcome John back to the region. It has been 2 years since we met. And I'm going to just try to address 3 different issues here. The first issue is we've been actually partnering with edX, and we established UAE UX in January 2020, just a couple of months before the pandemic hit. And in a very short time, we succeeded in putting 5 MOOCs on that, and we attracted tens of thousands of online learners. However, we ran into content or relevant content starvation after that. So my question here is, in order to avoid competing with the very well-established international higher education institutions on edX, how do we put relevant content that are relevant to the region without creating some competition in there? My second point is that, and I actually wanted to address that issue with the previous panel. When we talk about 50 to 60% of today's jobs that might be irrelevant in very few number of years, then this calls for more agility within the higher education institutions to be more responsive. If we bring that to the Middle Eastern or the Arab world context, how do we have agile higher education institutions in a region that we are still struggling with recognition of online degrees. We've been trying to actually stacking MicroMaster programs that are going to be offered within few months in our institution. We cannot stack up those MicroMasters because they might not be recognized by the Ministry of Education. So these are the issues that I would like to hear from Joan about how ethics or whatever your experience with this part of the world, how do we address those issues?
Thank you.
Look, let's work backwards, Hassan. You know, the ministries, the ministers of education, it's problematic, right? And that's something that we try to piggyback with universities like you to enlighten them in terms of best practices. And that's an uphill battle. It's gotten easier since the pandemic. There's a lot of work left. But the second thing, and I thought I was saying this, you know, pretty modestly, there is a challenge in the region with universities in terms of fully adopting the value proposition of online learning and jumping on board, right? Now, you guys have jumped on in a huge way. So your question is, hey, we've jumped on, we've got tens of thousands of learners, how do we not compete with Harvard and MIT and other institutions? Well, we know that there's easy ways, but because it's a broader audience, language, right? We have no Arabic content. Every single thing that's trending now, machine learning, AI, data science, data analytics, soft skills, find an Arabic course on our platform. It doesn't exist. So that's, and I've been saying this personally to many universities in the region for the last 5 years, right? Once we get those core courses in different languages, then it's the programs, the MicroMasters, the Micro-Bachelors, right? So there is a huge level up, you know, until we get there, and we're a long way away, which means, again, every university, no matter who you are, has to be part of that conversation. And you have to be part of it now. There is no option. Your brand has to be out of that larger ecosystem than you've been comfortably living with for the last few hundred years. That is the world we live in right now.
Thank you. We've got a question over here from actually my own colleague, THE's Jack Grove.
Hi, I'm Jack Grove. I'm a reporter at Times Higher. You've spoken a lot about the pandemic and all the changes there. One of the other big changes is that edX has been sold in June to a for-profit provider. Could you just tell us a bit about how that maybe might change the ongoing engagements with universities, and whether you've heard much back from universities about how they might provide courses in future for you?
Yeah, I mean, that's been kind of out of our purview, but from where I sit from a business development side, having another organization, and this is going to be, you know, not so interesting for most of the audience, having that infrastructure from a marketing perspective, a public relations perspective, resources that we as a nonprofit, you know, have always been challenged with, that's going to be a huge benefit, right? I mean, edX is I think one of the most esteemed organizations that not a lot of people know about, and that's simply because we are running as fast as we can with the most talented group of people I have ever been around in my 30-year, you know, career, but we're limited in size and scope. Having another entity that has a much larger back-end infrastructure that doesn't compete with what we're doing, but enhances it, we now can be, I don't want to say all things to all people, but what we can offer institutions, and most importantly, from where my team and I sit, learners get significantly enhanced.
Thank you, John. We had a gentleman at the back in a grey shirt. Is the microphone on?
Yeah, thanks. My name is Priyank. I'm from Ashoka University in India. My question to you, John, is that culturally, we've been looking at online courses as a top-up to traditional university education, and that model has worked well. culturally also, employers are not yet, at least in our part of the world, looking at hiring with people who have just an online degree. What can organizations like edX do to bring about that change from an employer's perspective? How do you change an employer's mindset? And how far are we from sort of saying that the brick and mortar degree is passé, and we can still have just an online degree and be as competitive and as successful in careers?
So that's an amazing question. I can tell you right now that there's a number of some of the biggest organizations in the world that are now targeting platforms like ours and Coursera, saying, hey, we need people with Java skills. We want to identify people on your platform that have successfully completed these courses, and if they've completed a course in diversity and inclusion or critical thinking or design thinking, we're interested in giving them an interview. And I'm talking about the biggest enterprises in the world. They need to fill that funnel. So while it may not be as prevalent right now in India, I can tell you, emphatically that that is absolutely the case. I would never say that the degree is not important. I come from a traditional four-year undergraduate degree. My children will hopefully go on to get a four-year undergraduate degree, but I will tell you this. The skills gap, and you've heard this in other panels, it is definitely widening. Everybody knows that. Corporations are more than willing now to look at alternative degrees, verifications, what have you, because they have a very prescriptive model and they know within reason what they need. So I can tell you, with our 44 million learners and soon to be, I guess, 100 million learners, we will be able to identify, and again, it's entirely up to the learner, but we will be able to target learners to feed those employment funnels that will cut down the cost of acquisition, because we know how expensive that is, and most importantly, in addition to the cost, time to acquire that new learner. So you are spot on. I believe that's the future. I believe that's how most enterprises and governments are going to be mining their new employees, because most every lifelong learner is going to be using some form of online digital learning and either have credentials, badging, certificates, verifications, which will be transferable in the real working world.
Excellent. We've got just time for one last question. Please.
Good afternoon. I'm Dr. Nilani from JSS University, Mysore, India. So I would like to ask John a question that when it comes to simulations and demonstration, limitations of operation of a real-world process in medical education. So we have been talking about MITs and the online systems of learning. How have you been working with any medical schools like Harvard Medical School or any other medical institutions? How this is going to help your process and the tie-up with the institution, how it is going to help the medical education in future? Thank you.
Yeah, it's a really excellent question, and I'm not going to give you the answer you want, but I'll tell you what's currently happening globally. It's one of our top priorities. I may generalize it, unfortunately. Healthcare is become a top priority. It's something that everybody is looking for online platforms to further develop. I'm sure there's going to be a host of challenges with certain parts of those professions, which I'm sure you're much more familiar with than I am. But I can tell you that we are making a very valiant and consistent effort in terms of finding that content that we know is most globally appealing and getting that onto our platform as quickly as we can. It's absolutely a top priority for us, and I'm sure for Coursera and the other platforms that are providing this online content.
Yes, thank you. And we look forward from the healthcare professionals and education providers. I think we need the support from all these online-based supporters please consider this. I place it to the forum, and please consider this is one of the most important requirement for the healthcare education and healthcare providers. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you all so much for your fantastic questions and sharing your opinions and experience. Thank you most of all, John. Please join me in thanking John, and I'll see you again soon.